Cold-blooded bikers mock a quiet farmer. When he stands up, they regret everything. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the vast fields that stretched endlessly in every direction. The only sounds that filled the air were the soft rustling of the wind through the crops and the rhythmic, steady movement of the farmer's hands as he worked. He was an older man, his face lined with years of hard work and dedication to the land he tended. His clothes were worn, his hands rough and calloused from a lifetime of labor. Yet there was a calmness to him, an air of quiet strength that came with years of living close to nature. He worked in solitude, as he always had, tending to the land and the animals that depended on him. The small farm was all he needed, and he didn't mind the quiet life that it provided. His days were filled with simple tasks, plowing the fields, fixing fences, mending tools, and he was content. But today his peace would be disturbed. The sound of roaring engines grew louder in the distance, the heavy thrum of motorcycle tires on gravel sending a ripple through the otherwise calm air. The farmer glanced up, his gaze steady as he saw the group of bikers approaching. He had seen them before, passing through town, revving their engines and making noise as they claimed the road as their own. But today was different. Today they stopped. The leader of the group, a tall figure clad in a black leather jacket, grinned as he revved his engine, the sound deafening in the stillness of the countryside. The other bikers followed suit, parking their bikes in a loose circle around the farmer, blocking his path. "Hey, old man," the leader called out, his voice loud and mocking. "You lost or something? Ain't you got anything better to do than play farmer in the middle of nowhere?" The farmer didn't answer, his weathered face impassive as he wiped his brow and continued his work. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge their presence. But the bikers weren't used to being ignored, and they weren't about to let him get away with it so easily. One of the bikers dismounted from his bike, a younger man with a smirk plastered across his face. "I don't think he heard you, boss," he said, laughing. "Maybe we need to get his attention." The leader stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dirt as he got closer to the farmer. "Hey, you deaf or just dumb?" he sneered. "You really gonna stand there like a statue while we're talking to you?" The farmer paused for a moment, his hand resting on the handle of his shovel. He didn't turn to face them, didn't flinch. Instead, he continued working as though they weren't even there. This only seemed to fuel the bikers' amusement. Another biker, a woman with long, wild hair, stepped forward, arms crossed over her leather jacket. "Maybe he's too old to talk," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You sure you're still good for this, old man?" The leader laughed again, shaking his head. "Maybe he's just scared. Don't blame him. Wouldn't want to mess with us either." The bikers circled him, closing in on his space, their laughter filling the air. They took pleasure in the discomfort they were causing, in the power they wielded over the quiet farmer. But the farmer remained calm, unbothered by their presence. He didn't look up. He didn't flinch. He just continued his work, as though this was just another interruption he had learned to ignore. A few more moments of taunting passed, but the farmer never reacted. His quiet resilience only seemed to make the bikers angrier, more frustrated. The woman biker leaned down, trying to get a rise out of him. "What, you think you're better than us?" she spat. "You really gonna keep ignoring us, old man?" At this, the farmer finally set down his shovel, his hands moving with slow deliberation. For the first time, he looked up from his work, his calm eyes meeting the mocking gaze of the leader. The bikers fell silent for a moment, unsure of what to make of his steady gaze. The farmer's voice was quiet but firm as he spoke for the first time. "I don't think I'm better than anyone, but I do know how to mind my business." The leader's smirk faltered, just slightly, at the unexpected response. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, the bikers unsure of how to proceed. But the leader recovered quickly, his grin returning. "Well, that's a shame," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because it looks like we're in your business now." The farmer stood straight, his hands at his sides. He didn't back down, didn't shy away. Instead, he regarded them with quiet dignity, as though their words didn't affect him at all. And that, more than anything, made the bikers pause. The bikers stood in a loose circle around the farmer, their laughter echoing across the open fields. For a brief moment, the sun cast long shadows over the land, but even the peaceful light seemed to retreat, overshadowed by the taunting voices. The leader of the group stepped closer, the smell of exhaust and leather thick in the air. He sneered down at the farmer, whose face remained calm, his hands steady as he adjusted his straw hat. "You don't get it, do you, old man?" the leader said, his voice rising with each word. "We're not going anywhere until you show us some respect." The woman biker, standing off to the side, gave a mocking laugh. "Maybe he's just too scared to talk. I don't think he has the guts to stand up to us." The others joined in with jeering comments as the group of bikers circled around the farmer, closing in on him from every direction. They had underestimated him at first. He was just a lonely old farmer they thought, easily intimidated. But now, seeing his continued silence, their irritation grew. "You're making this harder than it has to be, old man," one of the bikers said, taking a step forward, his hand resting on the handlebars of his bike as if waiting for something to happen. "You want us to leave, you're gonna have to earn it. Show us you're tough enough to make us leave." The farmer didn't flinch. He simply reached down and picked up his shovel again, his movements calm and measured. "I don't need to show you anything," he said softly, his voice carrying just enough weight to make the words hang in the air. "You're the ones making the mistake, not me," the leader sneered, stepping directly in front of him now. "And what's that supposed to mean? You think you're so special? You think you can just stand there and act like nothing's happening?" He leaned in closer, his breath hot with aggression. The woman biker, seeing the farmer's calmness, grew impatient and jabbed her finger at him. "Maybe you're just too old to fight back," she taunted. "You're a relic from the past. We're the future. You think you've got the right to stand up to us?" The bikers laughed, as if waiting for the farmer to shrink back or apologize. Instead, the farmer's grip on the shovel tightened, his knuckles going white. He took a slow step forward, the space between him and the bikers closing. For the first time, the bikers noticed the way his posture shifted, the subtle strength that had been hiding behind his stillness. His face, once serene, now held a quiet intensity. The group of bikers, once confident in their numbers, now found themselves hesitating. "Move aside," the farmer said, his voice unwavering. It wasn't a shout, wasn't a demand, it was just a statement of fact. The leader of the group stepped back, almost involuntarily, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere. He hadn't expected this. The others shifted uncomfortably, and the laughter that had filled the air died down, replaced by a sense of tension. "Did you hear that?" the leader muttered, still unsure how to react. "This guy thinks he can tell us what to do." The farmer didn't respond. He simply stood there, still but no longer passive. The shift was subtle but palpable. His calm confidence had become an unspoken challenge, and for the first time, the bikers began to wonder if they had misjudged him. The leader, who had always thrived on intimidation, took a deep breath. "I think it's time for you to learn a lesson, old man," he said, his voice lowering with venom. "We don't take kindly to people who don't know their place." He grabbed the handle of his bike, as if preparing to make a move. But something in the farmer's eyes stopped him. There was no fear, no sign of submission, just quiet resolve. The farmer wasn't backing down, and that single fact made the leader hesitate, made the air hang heavy with something neither he nor his gang could name. For a moment, it seemed like time had slowed. The bikers looked around at one another, each one uncertain. The leader, who had relied on his strength and fear to control every situation, suddenly felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't fear, at least not the kind he was used to, but it was something else, something uncomfortable. "Are you seriously going to stand there and let this old man talk to you like that?" The woman biker barked at the others, trying to stir up their usual bravado, but it didn't work. The other bikers were too distracted by the farmer's presence. His stillness, his quiet control seemed to fill the space around them, and for the first time, the bikers didn't know how to react. The woman biker took a step forward, raising her voice. "What's the deal, old man? You think you're some kind of hero? You think you can scare us?" The farmer finally spoke again, his voice low but carrying authority. "I don't need to scare you. I just need you to leave." His words were simple, but they hit harder than any punch. The bikers were no longer sure of their power. The dynamics had shifted, and they knew it. The tension was palpable now, hanging thick in the air like a storm that was yet to break. The group of bikers, once confident in their intimidation tactics, stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. The farmer, still holding his shovel, hadn't moved an inch. His steady gaze never wavered from the leader of the group, his presence quiet but commanding. The leader, feeling his control slipping, glanced nervously at his gang. This wasn't supposed to be how it went. He had dealt with people like this farmer before, weak, old, easy targets. He was used to people folding under pressure, begging for mercy. But the farmer was different. There was no fear, no hesitation, just quiet defiance that rattled him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Come on," the leader sneered, trying to regain his bravado. "You really gonna keep staring at me like that? Old man, what's the big deal? You've got nothing left. You're just wasting our time." But even as he spoke, the leader's voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. His words were falling flat, like an empty threat, and he knew it. The bikers behind him shifted, their eyes darting from the farmer to each other, discomfort growing among the group. The youngest biker, who had been the most eager to escalate the situation, glanced at the leader, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What are we doing here, man? This guy's not even..." He stopped mid-sentence, as if something about the farmer's quiet strength was starting to sink in. The discomfort was growing, and the younger biker couldn't quite shake the feeling that they were making a mistake. "Shut up," the leader barked, trying to cover up the growing uncertainty. He took a step closer to the farmer, attempting to reassert control. "I'm done playing games. You think you're tough? You think you can stare us down like you've got something to prove?" The farmer didn't answer. Instead, he straightened his back slowly, lifting his head to meet the leader's gaze with quiet intensity. It was subtle, but the shift in his posture was undeniable. He wasn't just some old man who had spent too many years in the fields. He was someone who had lived a life of resilience, someone who understood the weight of the earth beneath his feet and the gravity of every decision made. The bikers could feel it now, the shift in the air. The old man wasn't just standing up to them, he was challenging them. They weren't the ones in control anymore. And that realization, that crushing feeling of vulnerability, began to spread through the group like a sickness. The woman biker, who had been the most vocal in her taunts, took a step forward, her eyes narrowing in defiance. "You're a joke," she spat. "You're nothing but a relic from the past. Some old farmer who doesn't know how to back down. You think that means something? You think that makes you powerful?" The farmer didn't respond. His face remained calm, his demeanor unshaken by her words. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to explain. His very presence, still, steady, and unflinching, was enough. His silence spoke volumes. The leader of the bikers stepped back, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. He hadn't anticipated this. He thought this would be easy. He thought he could rattle the farmer, make him flinch, make him bow down. But instead, he found himself questioning his own actions, wondering if they had gone too far. "You should have just stayed out of it," the leader muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. But the words fell flat. The farmer's voice, when it came, was soft yet undeniable, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think you're better than me because you have power? Because you have strength? You think that's all it takes to win?" The group of bikers was quiet now, each of them sensing that something had changed. They were no longer the predators in this situation. They were the ones being watched, being judged, and it was making them uneasy. The farmer stepped forward, his movements slow but purposeful. His voice was calm, but there was a fire beneath it that made the leader step back, a chill running down his spine. "I've spent my life working this land. I've worked harder than any of you could understand, harder than you'll ever know. And it's taught me something that you'll never learn. Strength isn't about who can yell the loudest or who can threaten the most. It's about who can stand firm, no matter what." The leader looked around at his gang, his earlier bravado now completely gone. The younger bikers were no longer laughing, no longer smirking. They were looking at the farmer with something else now, respect. Or perhaps it was fear. They were unsure, uncomfortable, caught in a feeling they hadn't expected. The woman biker, who had been the most vocal, felt it too. The power had shifted, and she couldn't deny it. The farmer wasn't just standing up to them. He was making them confront their own actions, making them realize the depth of their own arrogance. For the first time, the bikers didn't know how to respond. They were no longer the ones in control. The quiet farmer had won, not with force, not with violence, but with the strength of his unshakable resolve. The bikers stood still, the air between them and the farmer thick with uncertainty. The leader, once so confident in his ability to dominate, felt the weight of the farmer's gaze like a tangible force pressing down on him. He had always prided himself on being the one in control, the one who could intimidate anyone who crossed his path. But now, in the face of the farmer's quiet strength, he realized how hollow that control had always been. A few of the younger bikers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the others, as though searching for reassurance. But there was none. Their bravado had faltered, and the doubt that crept into their minds was unmistakable. They had come here thinking they could push around an old man, but instead, they had walked into a trap of their own making. The woman biker, still standing with her arms crossed, let out a frustrated growl. "Why the hell are we standing around letting this guy lecture us?" she spat. "He's just an old farmer. He's nothing. We can take him down whenever we want." But even as the words left her mouth, there was a hesitation in her voice, a crack in the once unshakable confidence she had exuded. The biker gang was no longer united in their mission to belittle the farmer. Their unity had splintered, each of them silently questioning whether this was the fight they wanted to keep engaging in. The leader's eyes darted from the woman to the farmer, his jaw tight. "Shut up," he muttered, his voice strained. "You don't get it, do you? We're still in control here. We can still make this go our way." But even as he spoke, his words lacked the force they once held. His authority seemed to slip with every passing moment, each second that he spent standing before the farmer, unsure of how to proceed. The farmer's calm presence was starting to have an effect that none of them had predicted. The leader took a step back, his eyes narrowing, trying to regain his composure. But there was nothing he could do to shake the feeling that this was no longer just a simple confrontation. "You're the one making this harder," the farmer finally said, his voice low, but laced with undeniable conviction. "Not me. I've been standing here, minding my business. You came to me, and now you're trying to push me into something I don't need to be a part of." The bikers were silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of his words. They had expected a confrontation, a fight, a show of force. Instead, they were faced with a man who didn't need to shout or swing a punch to make his point. His words weren't violent, but they carried the force of 1,000 unspoken truths. "Look at you," the farmer continued, his voice steady, unbothered. "You think you're tough because you can shout and intimidate. You think the world is yours to control, that power comes from fear and strength. But it doesn't. Power comes from within. It's something you carry with you, and it doesn't need to be flaunted." There was a long silence after the farmer's words. The bikers were no longer laughing, no longer mocking him. They were standing there, stuck in the discomfort of their own realization. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and they were beginning to understand that they had been outplayed. The leader was the first to break the silence, but his words came out differently than before. I didn't think you were this strong," he said quietly, as though confessing a truth he had tried to ignore. "I thought you were just some old guy." The farmer looked at him, his gaze unyielding but not filled with malice. "I'm not just anything," he said, "and neither are you. But if you want to keep pretending you can bully everyone around you, go ahead. But remember, there's always someone who won't back down. And today that someone is me." The bikers were still, no longer sure of what to do. The leader shifted uneasily, his eyes flicking to his gang, but no one seemed willing to make a move. They had no confidence left to draw from. The woman biker, who had been the loudest in her insults, stood there, staring at the farmer, her previous defiance gone. She had been the one to challenge him most, yet now she was unsure of her own actions. The force of the farmer's calmness had made her question herself, and for the first time, she saw the situation for what it really was. Her gang had been the aggressors, and they had misjudged the farmer completely. The leader took a deep breath, the weight of the silence pressing down on him. He had led this group for so long, relying on intimidation and brute force. But now, standing before the farmer, he realized that the true strength didn't come from muscle or loud voices. It came from a quiet, unyielding strength that only those who had endured could truly understand. "Let's go," the leader muttered, turning toward his bike. "This isn't worth it." The rest of the gang followed, one by one, retreating toward their bikes in silence. They didn't speak. They didn't joke. They didn't laugh. They just left. Each of them carrying a new understanding of the man they had tried to harass. Each of them beginning to grasp that they had underestimated him in ways they couldn't undo. The farmer didn't move. He didn't watch them leave. He simply returned to his work, the quiet hum of his life resuming in the wake of their departure. The dust settled in the wake of the bikers' departure, the only sound now the soft rustling of the wind through the fields. The farmer stood still for a moment longer, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. He didn't watch them leave. There was no need. He had already won. The bikes had roared to life, their engines fading as the group retreated down the long, winding road. The leader, once so confident, now felt the sting of defeat as he looked in his rearview mirror. The rest of the gang remained silent, their usual bravado gone, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of their own shortcomings. But the farmer? He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His silence had been his strength, his ability to hold firm without a word spoken. It was a quiet victory, the kind that wasn't celebrated with loud cheers or dramatic confrontations. It was the kind of victory that lasted far longer than any fight could. The farmer had stood his ground not with force, but with dignity, and in doing so, he had made them realize something important. He had made them realize that strength comes not from intimidation or noise, but from the ability to remain unshaken, no matter the odds. After a few minutes, the farmer went back to his work, his movements slow and steady, like they had always been. There was no rush, no need for fanfare. He had lived a life of simplicity, finding peace in the rhythms of the land. It was in the small acts of everyday life that he found fulfillment, tending the crops, fixing fences, and taking care of his animals. The bikers had come and gone, but his world remained unchanged. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples, the farmer wiped his hands on his trousers and took a moment to look around. The fields stretched out before him, endless and peaceful. There was something satisfying about knowing that the world could change, but his place in it remained steady. He had weathered storms before, both literal and metaphorical, and each time he had come through stronger. He knew the bikers would talk. They would tell their stories of the old man who had stood up to them, the one they had mocked and underestimated. They would never forget the feeling of standing before him, realizing too late that they had misjudged him completely. But it wouldn't matter. The farmer didn't care for their judgment. He didn't care for anyone's opinion but his own. The respect he had earned wasn't loud or forced. It was earned in silence, through the strength of his character. As night fell, the stars began to twinkle above, and the farmer sat down on his porch, his thoughts drifting with the cool evening breeze. The world was quiet, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself a rare smile, a small, satisfied smile. He had done what was needed and nothing more. The bikers had come looking for trouble, but instead, they had left with a lesson they would never forget. There was no triumph in the air, no grand gesture. There was only the satisfaction of knowing that true strength didn't need to make a sound. The farmer had stood tall, not with a shout or a swing, but with the unwavering belief that he was enough as he was. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The stars above shone brightly, as steady and constant as the farmer himself. The world was at peace once again, the lesson learned, the regret felt. But in the end, it was the farmer who had the last word. And it was the silence of his victory that would echo far longer than the roar of any engine.